The US Supreme Court has now blocked Joe Biden's executive action for a vaccine protocol, not mandate. I will get into that in a moment, but vaccine protocol as it relates to employers with 100 employees or more. Now, this should not be a shock to those in the political hierarchy on the left, because it was well known that this decision may very well fall on partisan lines. That's exactly what happened. All right, so I do agree with the dissent. The more left-leaning justices said this was quite appropriate based on the law, and those that lean right said it is not. So let me give you some background to this. The US Supreme Court struck down the Biden administration's vaccine or test rule Thursday, declaring that OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, had exceeded its authority. Now, let me remind you about messaging, and I've talked about this from day one. Democrats have a real difficult time properly messaging something. I literally heard Democrats on CNN and other places calling it a vaccine mandate. It was never a vaccine mandate, it was a vaccine protocol. A vaccine mandate would mean that this was a mandate that everybody had to get it. That was not the case. You had various exemptions. Number one, you could test out once every 7 days. Number two, there was a religious exemption. Number three, there was a philosophical exemption. And number four, there was a medical exemption. Not a mandate, but definitely a protocol, all right? Number two, the other part of this whole thing, like the big part, is that Biden was aware that this would likely get overturned, or at least a strong possibility. But even when the administration was pressed about the possibility of the Supreme Court, the response was basically, hey, guess what? By that time, a whole lot of people would have been vaccinated because of this protocol, and Americans will have lives saved, all right? But at the same time, the court upheld a regulation issued by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services that mandates vaccines for almost all employees at hospitals, nursing homes, and other healthcare providers that receive federal funding. So we call this a mixed decision, okay? This is a mixed decision. So on one hand, the Supreme Court says no to the mandates. I disagree with the majority. I agree with the dissent in this, but that is the ruling of the court. But on the other hand, they said if it happens to be a healthcare facility that receives federal funding on any level, then the mandate or protocol is proper. Now, let's go back to what's not happening. You will not see any left-leaning group storm the US Capitol. You will not see left-leaning groups call to get weapons and possibly kill members of the government. You will not see left-leaning groups call for the death of conservative Supreme Court justices. Left-leaning groups are not going to go to the streets and act out in violence. You know why? Because those who are progressives, they demonstrate their values within the context of the system they believe in. They believe in the system of change. They believe in the system of progress. And so they are going to express these values in the context of that system. And they are going to follow and uphold the legacy of great Americans like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Those on the other side, not so much. So this gives a massive contrast to those in this country who actually would like to see this country be all it can be. It's amazing how those on the right will argue that in order for America to be great, you must kill Americans. That in order for America to be great, you must destroy the Constitution. That in order for America to be great, you must dismiss democracy and rule of law. But those on the left are going to continue to fight the ultimate battle over and over again because we push the needle. It's a game of chess, not checkers. Remember that lesson. The game of chess is different from the game of checkers. In checkers, you use power to gain position. But in chess, you use position to gain power. The question is, have we moved the needle in the right direction? And I would emphatically say yes. The needle is moving in the right direction. Even with a conservative Supreme Court, the Biden administration did get at least half a win which is more than the Biden administration has done for themselves. Okay, there's more. The vote to invalidate the vaccine or test regulation was a 6-3 vote along ideological lines. Although Congress has indisputably given OSHA the power to regulate occupational dangers, it has not given that agency the power to regulate public health more broadly. Now, I want you to remember that. That is according to the ruling. The majority said in an unsigned opinion, requiring the vaccination of 84 million Americans selected simply because they work for employers with more than 100 employees certainly falls in the latter category. Now, remember, they said, hey, OSHA has broad powers based on the 1970 law that Congress passed. That law gets its power out of the Commerce Clause of the US Constitution. Once again, I stand with the dissent. But those in the majority opinion said, hey, the reason why we're saying this is illegal is because OSHA does not have the power to regulate these massive health issues in the workplace. I disagree. Let me show you why. 1970, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, commonly called OSHA, was enacted to create what? Safe working conditions by authorizing standard work practices. Congress found that workplace personal injuries and illnesses, this is in the wording of the congressional law, and illnesses contributed to a decline in production and wages, plus an increase in medical expenses and disability compensation. The act was designed to ensure that workers are protected from hazards that may affect their safety and health. Word for word, statutory language is in the actual bill passed in 1970. Yes, OSHA has the authority based on the legal statutory language to regulate as it relates to health. The dissent, once again, in my opinion, was correct. There's more. So Justices Stephen Breyer, Sotomayor, Kagan, the court's three left-leaning, they dissented in an opinion written by Breyer. They said the conservative majority seriously misapplies the applicable legal standards. I agree, and in doing so, it stymies the federal government's ability to counter the unparalleled threat that COVID-19 poses to our nation's workers. I completely agree with that summary in the dissent of the US Supreme Court. All right, the decision to invalidate the regulation comes as COVID-19 cases soar. Earlier this week, a record 1.4 million new cases were reported in one day. Hospitals across the country have been swamped, mainly with unvaccinated patients. Some hospitals are reporting that 88% of the hospitalizations are people that are not vaccinated. The situation has been serious enough to prompt some governors to call out the National Guard to help, even as governors in some other Republican-dominated states have made vaccine mandates illegal. They're talking out of both sides of their ass, basically. In a statement, President Biden said, and I quote, he was disappointed that the Supreme Court has chosen to block common sense, life-saving requirements from employees at large businesses that were grounded squarely in both science and the law. Once again, I agree with the dissent. The president said his administration's various vaccination requirements have saved lives. Yep. And he called on business leaders to immediately join those who have already stepped up, including 1/3 of Fortune 100 companies, and institute vaccination requirements to protect their workers, customers, and communities. Once again, vaccination protocol should have been the messaging standard for the president and others. The court upholds mandates for health workers in stark contrast to the decision in the OSHA case. The court voted 5-4 in the CMS case to uphold mandatory vaccinations for Medicare and Medicaid providers. The court's three liberals, according to the narrative, were joined by Chief Justice Roberts and Kavanaugh, okay? This is going to be interesting because I actually believe this will be challenged on another level, but it's going to be interesting to see exactly how this pans out legislatively, because at some point you have to create legislative behind these executive orders and judicial rulings. Right now, you do not have exact legislation to govern this other than what states, primarily Republican states, have decided to write into law. But there you have it. Guess what? Nobody's trying to destroy the country.